Olivia Hart had mastered the art of vanishing in plain sight. Every morning she slipped through the revolving doors of Maddox Innovations with the same quiet precision, a neat figure in her gray blazer, hair pulled back into a tight knot, flats tapping softly against polished marble. No one stopped her, no one greeted her. The guards at the front desk barely lifted their eyes. To most, she was a moving shadow on the edge of the skyscraper's brilliance, one more anonymous figure in a city filled with them. Inside, the atmosphere was always sharp, humming with ambition. Screens flickered, voices murmured. Men in dark suits spoke in clipped tones about mergers and markets. Yet Olivia moved among them like she belonged to the furniture. She kept her head down, tablet in hand, always 3 steps behind the man everyone else scrambled to impress. Grant Maddox, billionaire CEO, genius innovator, the enigma of New York. His name commanded rooms, toppled deals, and created headlines. Beside him, Olivia was a silence people learned not to notice. But invisibility had its uses. When Grant's clients forgot their children's birthdays, Olivia didn't. When his mother complained of feeling neglected, Olivia sent flowers every Thursday in his name, choosing the blooms herself, each card signed with his clipped initials. When a partner's wife hinted at her favorite wine, Olivia arranged for a case to appear at her door. No one knew. Not Grant, not the board, not the glittering investors who toasted their fortunes in glass towers. It was Olivia who softened edges, who kept the empire running smoothly, not through power but through details so delicate they almost disappeared. She carried within her a memory sharper than any algorithm Grant had designed. He asked for no opinions, but she learned to anticipate what he might need before he spoke. His moods, mapped like storm patterns, too, told her when to shield him from small talk, when to delay calls, when to slip a file into his hand without a word. She was efficient, precise, flawless, and in his world, that meant invisible. No one asked how she stayed so late, long after the offices had emptied, reviewing contracts to catch mistakes even the legal team overlooked. No one saw her tuck trembling hands into her lap the night her phone lit up with news that left her eyes red and swollen, yet she returned to her desk without a sound. She was always there, the quiet figure behind the great man, the assistant who never raised her voice, never faltered, never demanded anything more than another day in the shadows. Yet small cracks in the mask revealed something deeper. The way her gaze lingered on the skyline through the conference room windows, as if she longed for air beyond the glass. The way her shoulders straightened when no one was watching, betraying a strength that didn't match her silence. Even the way she corrected mistakes with a steady hand, unshaken by pressure that made executives twice her age stumble. Olivia had become an expert at shrinking herself to fit the narrow space she'd been given. But the truth was there, waiting, like fire behind smoke. She wasn't invisible because she lacked brilliance. She was invisible because brilliance frightened men like Grant Maddox, men who relied on silence to hold their thrones steady. And somewhere beneath her calm exterior, Olivia Hart had already begun to wonder what might happen the day she stopped disappearing. The boardroom was alive with polished laughter and the clink of crystal as if business itself had turned into theater. Grant Maddox sat at the head of the table like he always did, untouched and unreadable in his midnight suit, while the men around him tossed words back and forth like cards in a game only they could win. Charles Whitmore, with his graying temples and knowing grin, leaned across the table and said with mock concern, "Tell me, Grant, you're not going alone to the gala again." Marcus Delgado's booming chuckle followed close behind. "People are starting to say you're more machine than man. You close billion-dollar deals, but you can't bring a date." The air in the room tightened. They thought they were teasing him, but Grant felt the edges of his pride bristle. For years he had dismissed these remarks. Women are distractions, he would say. They weaken focus and control, but tonight their tone landed differently. Charles's smirk felt like a challenge, Marcus's laughter like a jab. Without meaning to, Grant straightened in his chair, his voice smooth and cold. "I already have someone." Silence cut through the room. Charles raised a brow with amusement. "Really? Who is she?" Grant leaned back, his expression unreadable. "My assistant." For a beat, the room stayed still, then both men burst into laughter, the kind of laughter that echoed off glass walls. Marcus shook his head, incredulous. "Hart, right? The woman who barely speaks, the one who moves like a shadow. Charles smirked. If you're trying to surprise us, you succeeded. Grant did not smile. His voice came sharper than steel. She is not what you think. He rose from his chair, the tension in his shoulders masked by calm precision. He left them mid-chuckle, but the sound followed him down the corridor like a ghost. By the time he reached the outer office, his jaw was tight, his pulse heavier than he would admit even to himself. Olivia sat at her desk typing swiftly. Her hair pulled back, her posture perfect. She did not look up when he paused, but he noticed for the first time how steady her hands were on the keys, how the small lamp cast a glow on her cheek. For 2 years, he had never allowed himself to see her beyond efficiency. Yet in that moment, with Charles's laughter still ringing in his head, he found himself staring longer than he ever had. "Olivia," he said. Her fingers paused. "Yes, Mr. Maddox." He did not hesitate. "Friday evening, 7 sharp, you will attend the gala with me." She blinked, her lips parting as if to confirm she had heard him correctly. "Excuse me." His tone never shifted. "It is not personal, it is optics. A stylist will prepare you. A car will collect you at 6:30. That is all." He walked into his office and closed the door with finality. Olivia sat frozen, her heart beating a rhythm she had not felt in years. It had not been a request. It had been an order, as if she were another extension of his schedule, a piece of furniture to polish and display. Heat rose to her cheeks, but beneath the sting, something else stirred, something sharper. She could have said no, but instead a quiet fire lit inside her chest. If they wanted to see her, then they would see all of her. Not a shadow, not a whisper. For the first time, Olivia Hart imagined herself stepping into the light, and Grant Maddox had no idea what storm he had just invited into his perfect, controlled world. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the skyline of Manhattan, but inside Maddox Innovations, the air was heavier than usual. Word had already traveled through the marble corridors, whispers sliding from one department to another. Grant Maddox had spoken to Olivia Hart in front of people, and not only spoken, but invited her to the most exclusive gala in New York. Assistants gathered near the elevators, pretending to scroll their phones while their voices lowered in disbelief. Her, the quiet one with the glasses. Impossible. No one believed it yet. Curiosity burned through every corner of the tower. Olivia walked through the lobby with her usual calm. Her blazer pressed, her hair bound neatly at the nape of her neck. But there was something different in the rhythm of her steps. Her heels struck the floor with purpose, not hesitation. And when she passed the stairs, she did not shrink. She lifted her chin just slightly, as if daring them to keep looking. She did not belong to their whispers anymore. She belonged to herself. By midday, a woman arrived in the executive wing, a stylist named Celeste, known for dressing movie stars and senators. Her presence sent another wave of gossip through the staff, but Olivia remained steady. In the private conference room, Celeste circled her like a sculptor studying uncut marble. "You hide too much," she said gently. Olivia replied, "I am ready to be seen." Celeste's eyes gleamed as though she had been waiting for those words. Fabrics spilled across the table, silks, satins, colors that shimmered like constellations. Olivia touched the cloths with steady fingers, choosing not what was safe, but what called to her. Deep navy with threads of silver like a night sky alive with secrets. Meanwhile, in his corner office, Grant tried to bury himself in contracts, but his attention kept drifting through the glass wall. He could see them, Celeste adjusting a gown against Olivia's frame. Olivia standing tall, hands folded before her, posture unbroken. For years, she had been invisible to him, yet now he felt a shift. Something unsettled pressing against the walls of his composure. He told himself it was nothing, a distraction, but his heart did not listen. It beat faster each time he caught the tilt of her chin, the quiet defiance in her stillness. The next day his phone buzzed with a calendar update, not from his own hand. Fitting review. Thursday, 2 o'clock, Olivia Hart. He frowned at the intrusion, but before he could erase it, Olivia appeared in the doorway, her voice even and calm. "Just confirming, Mr. Maddox, you will attend the final fitting tomorrow. The tailor requested your presence." He looked up sharply, unused to her initiative. "I was not aware I was needed." She met his eyes and held them longer than she ever had. "You wanted optics," she said. "This is part of that." There was no edge in her tone, no mockery, only quiet certainty. Grant hesitated, then gave a single nod. "I will be there." That night, Olivia stood in front of her small bathroom mirror, her hair released from its knot tumbling in soft spirals. She studied herself not with vanity but with recognition. For 2 years she had lived small, efficient, silent. Now she saw something else reflected back, a woman who had carried storms quietly under her skin, waiting for the right moment to break free. She whispered to her own reflection, "Tomorrow they will look at you, and they will finally see." And in his penthouse, high above the city, Grant Maddox sat with a glass of scotch, unable to erase the image of her calm defiance from his mind. For the first time in his life, he realized control might be slipping, and he did not know whether he feared it or secretly longed for it. The gala was approaching, and he sensed the night would not belong to him. It would belong to her. The night of the gala unfolded like a secret waiting to be told. The Metropolitan Museum's grand atrium shimmered with golden chandeliers and walls dressed in cascading lights. Laughter rang like champagne glasses colliding, but beneath it all was the low hum of expectation. Everyone was watching for Grant Maddox, the untouchable billionaire who always arrived alone as if companionship were beneath him. Rumor had already spread that this year would be different, and the crowd was restless. Grant stepped through the private side entrance, his tailored tuxedo sharp, his presence slicing through the room. Eyes followed him as they always did. Men stiffened their posture. Women whispered behind jeweled hands. But Grant felt the difference tonight. The whispers were not about him. They were about who might walk in beside him. He had not admitted even to himself why his chest felt tight as he waited. He told himself it was about image, about control, about silencing Charles and Marcus. But deep down, something colder and more fragile stirred. For the first time in years, he was not in command of the narrative. Olivia was. Then the main doors opened. The sound in the atrium shifted from chatter to silence so sudden it felt like the air itself had frozen. Heads turned one by one toward the staircase, and there she stood. Olivia Hart, no longer the quiet assistant who slipped unnoticed through hallways. She descended slowly in a gown of deep navy embroidered with threads that caught the light like stars falling across midnight. Her hair framed her face in soft waves, her eyes steady, her every step deliberate, as if she had walked into this world not to ask permission, but to claim it. Grant's breath faltered. For a moment he forgot the room, forgot the cameras, forgot himself. She did not look at him. She did not look for anyone's approval. She looked forward, owning the space as though she had always belonged there. His hand twitched by his side, resisting the urge to move toward her to stake some kind of claim, but he stayed still. Control had always been his shield, but tonight control felt like quicksand slipping between his fingers. As Olivia reached the floor, a familiar voice cut across the silence. Dylan Hayes, Grant's rival, known for his charm and ruthlessness, appeared with a glass in hand, his smile sharp. "Now, this is unexpected," he said, offering his hand to Olivia. "I don't believe we have met, and I assure you I would remember." Olivia accepted the handshake, her poise unshaken. "Olivia Hart," she replied. Dylan's eyes narrowed with sudden interest. "As in Maddox's assistant?" "That's right," she said simply. Grant was at her side in an instant, his jaw tight, his presence magnetic. "Miss Hart," he said, his voice cutting away Dylan's smirk. "You look appropriate." Olivia tilted her head, her smile calm. "That's quite the compliment, Mr. Maddox." Then she turned back to Dylan and with a polite nod excused herself, choosing to place her hand lightly on Grant's arm, not because he demanded it, but because she chose to. The gesture sent a ripple of heat through Grant, something he could not control, something he could not dismiss. They moved into the center of the room together. But the whispers did not die. Olivia was no longer invisible, and the crowd saw it the moment she opened her mouth to speak with donors and investors. She did not stumble, she did not shrink. She spoke with clarity about technology, about global youth initiatives, about markets with a fluency that made even seasoned executives lean closer. People listened not because of her beauty, but because her words had weight. For the first time, Grant realized he was not the star of the evening. She was, and as he watched her command the room with quiet authority, Grant Maddox felt the unthinkable. The man who had built an empire on power and distance felt his composure cracking. He had invited Olivia to the gala as an accessory, but standing beside her, he knew the truth. She was no accessory, she was the storm he had never seen coming, and he was already losing control. The gala had become a chessboard, and every move mattered. Crystal glasses, clinked violins played in the corner, but beneath the glitter of gowns and tuxedos, currents of rivalry and ambition surged unseen. Grant Maddox felt it the same way he felt market shifts before they hit the news. Except tonight, it was not numbers or contracts that unsettled him. It was Dylan Hayes circling Olivia like a predator who had scented weakness. Dylan had always thrived on spectacle. His smile was too sharp, his charm too rehearsed, and he loved nothing more than finding cracks in Grant's empire. But tonight he had found something better. He had found Olivia. She had barely taken 3 steps into the crowd before Dylan reappeared, glass in hand, voice rich with mockery, disguised as admiration. "Maddox has been hiding you far too long," he told her. "I almost thought he kept you in a vault." The people nearby laughed politely, but their eyes stayed fixed on Olivia. They wanted to see if she would shrink or stumble. Olivia did neither. Her lips curved into a calm smile. "Maybe I was just busy keeping the vault from collapsing," she said, her tone light but her words edged with steel. A ripple of surprise passed through the group. Someone coughed into their drink to hide a laugh. Dylan's eyes flashed, not with amusement, but with calculation. He leaned closer, lowering his voice for her alone. "Careful, Miss Hart, sometimes the most dangerous place to stand is in someone else's shadow." Grant had been watching from across the room, his jaw tightening with every syllable. He was used to rivals mocking him, but Dylan's attention on Olivia was different. It burned. Without hesitation, he crossed the floor, his hand brushing Olivia's back as he placed himself between them. "That will be enough, Dylan." But Dylan only grinned wit. "Dare. Relax." "Grant, we were just talking. Interesting choice, by the way. She is far more than she appears." His gaze lingered on Olivia a second too long before he drifted away, leaving tension heavy in his wake. The air between Olivia and Grant crackled as if the chandelier light above them had turned to fire. She turned to him, her expression serene, though her eyes glittered with something unspoken. "Thank you, Mr. Maddox, but I don't need protection." Her voice was even, but beneath it lay a quiet defiance. Grant's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to insist, but the truth pressed against his chest. She was right. She didn't need him yet. Every part of him wanted to stand there anyway. The night deepened, and with it the storm. Dylan was not finished. Grant could see him moving through the crowd, whispering in ears, laughing too loudly, watching Olivia from the corner of his eye. And Olivia continued to rise, her voice carrying softly, yet with power, as she spoke to donors about education initiatives, to investors about overlooked markets. Each word made the crowd lean closer. Each smile made them forget the quiet shadow she used to be. She was commanding the night, and Grant knew it. For the first time, he was not the one everyone else watched. But in Dylan's grin, Grant saw danger forming. Dylan was not just amused, he was plotting. Grant's instincts sharpened the way they always did before an attack in the market. Only this time the stakes were not numbers on a screen. This time the target was standing beside him in a gown that shimmered like starlight and a presence that unsettled him more than any rival ever could. The gala was no longer about optics, no longer about silencing jokes. It was about something raw and dangerous. Desire, jealousy, power, and the quiet beginnings of war. Grant Maddox felt control slipping through his hands, and he knew Dylan would not stop until the cracks, widened. What he did not know yet was that Olivia herself would become the piece no one could predict, the one move that could undo everything he thought he controlled. The music shifted from the gentle background of strings to a haunting melody that pulled at every corner of the grand atrium. Couples began to drift toward the dance floor, gowns swishing across marble, tuxedos gliding in rhythm. Grant Maddox had never cared for such rituals. To him, dances were distractions, empty gestures meant for the pages of glossy magazines. But tonight, as he watched Olivia speak effortlessly to a circle of executives, something twisted inside him. She was no longer invisible, no longer an accessory to his image. She was the center, and he could feel her slipping from his grasp, not because she needed to, but because she chose to. He crossed the room, each step deliberate, his presence silencing murmurs. When he stopped in front of her, the men surrounding her fell quiet, waiting. Grant extended his hand. "Dance with me." It was not a suggestion. His voice cut through the music like steel wrapped in velvet. Olivia tilted her head, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Are you asking or assuming?" Her voice was calm, but her eyes held fire. For the first time in years, Grant hesitated. "I am asking," he said finally, his voice low, almost uncertain. The room seemed to lean closer, hungry for her answer. She studied him for a heartbeat, then placed her hand in his. "Very well." They moved onto the dance floor, and for the first few steps, their bodies were stiff, their rhythm distant. To anyone watching, it might have looked like two colleagues going through motions. But the air between them told another story. His hand rested against her back, firmer than it should have. Her fingertips lingered at his shoulder a second too long. Their eyes locked, and the silence between them grew heavy with everything neither dared to say. The music swelled, and with it something inside Grant cracked. His control, the fortress he had built over years of discipline, began to falter. He leaned closer, his breath brushing against her ear. "You are making quite an impression." Olivia's lips curved again, but her smile never reached her eyes. "I am not here to impress anyone. I am just being myself." Her words struck deeper than any rival's insult, sharper than any business loss. He had built an empire on control, on numbers, on power. Yet here was a woman who stood beside him unafraid, her strength not in wealth, but in presence. For the first time, Grant realized he was not the one leading the dance. She was. The music slowed, and the world seemed to fade until only the two of them remained. Olivia's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through him. "You don't see me, Grant. Not really." His brows furrowed, his jaw tightening. "I am seeing you now." She shook her head gently. "No, you are noticing me now. There is a difference." Her words landed like a blow, shaking something buried in his chest. He opened his mouth, but no answer came. The music ended, applause filling the room, but Grant stood frozen, her hand slipping from his as she turned and walked away into the glittering crowd. For the first time in his life, the most powerful man in the room felt powerless, watching a woman he had once ignored become the storm he could no longer control. And somewhere in the shadows, Dylan Hayes watched too, his smile curling at the edges. He had seen the crack in Grant's armor. He had seen the fire in Olivia's eyes. And he knew the night was only the beginning of something far more dangerous than a dance. The gala glitter still lingered in memory, but the following week shattered the illusion like glass underfoot. Maddox Innovations was on the brink of its most ambitious merger yet, $8 billion tied to Kronos Tech and the press already circling for headlines. Grant moved through the building with his usual steel mask, but inside the tension coiled tight. He could not erase the sound of Olivia's voice on the dance floor reminding him that noticing was not the same as seeing. And now with the deal hanging by a thread, she occupied his thoughts more than he allowed himself to admit. Late one evening, the silence of his office cracked with urgency. His lead engineer burst in, pale eyes frantic. "We have a problem." The words froze the air. A breach. Someone used Maddox credentials to access Kronos encryption files. If regulators catch wind, the deal is dead and our reputation will collapse with it. Grant rose slowly, his voice low and dangerous. Who had access? The answer landed like a knife. Only one person had full permissions on that layer. Olivia Hart. For a moment, the world tilted. Grant's instinct was to reject it outright, but the engineer laid the evidence on the table logs, timestamps, credentials. Every detail pointed to her. Within hours, the board demanded immediate action. She must be suspended. Protocols must be followed, no exceptions. Grant's legal team insisted on distance. His advisors urged silence. And though rage thundered in his chest, though every instinct told him this was wrong, he stood behind glass and watched as security approached her desk. Olivia did not cry. She did not shout. She rose with calm dignity as two men escorted her out past colleagues who whispered behind their hands. Her badge was deactivated. Her computer seized her name, scrubbed from the system she had kept alive with her brilliance. Grant watched her figure shrink against the marble core. Rydor. His jaw locked, his fists clenched at his sides. Every step she took away from him felt like a betrayal, not hers but his. He had power to speak to stop the charade, but fear gripped him. Fear of losing the deal, fear of losing control. And so he stayed silent. That night, Olivia sat in her apartment, the city buzzing beneath her window, as if mocking the quiet inside. She replayed every moment in her mind, every flower she had sent in his name, every report she had perfected, every sacrifice she had made to keep the empire flawless. And in return, she had been discarded like a liability. What cut deepest was not the false accusation, it was the silence. The man who had finally begun to see her had vanished when it mattered. Grant poured himself a drink in his penthouse, but the scotch tasted bitter. He told himself it was procedure, that he could fix it quietly, that she would understand once the dust cleared. But deep down he knew the truth. He had failed her. The boardroom lion, the man who never bent, had crumbled when she needed him strong. And somewhere across the city, Olivia Hart was packing not just a suitcase, but the remnants of her old life. She would not wait for rescue. She would not beg for justice. She would disappear, not as a shadow this time, but as a storm retreating to rebuild. And in the quiet corners of New York, Dylan Hayes smiled to himself, his plan already in motion. He had planted the trail, he had twisted the evidence, and now the fracture between Grant and Olivia was complete. What no one knew yet was that Dylan had not simply framed her for sabotage. He had set the stage for a war that would drag both Maddox and Olivia into a reckoning that neither of them was prepared to face. Rain swept across Manhattan like a curtain the morning Olivia Hart left the city behind. It was not the violent kind of storm that cracked windows and flooded streets, but a soft, relentless drizzle, a quiet farewell from a place that had taken more than it ever gave. Her apartment was stripped of her presence, only a single suitcase by the door, and a candle burned low on the counter, the last flame she would allow New York to see. She had packed without hesitation, deleting contacts, forwarding her final paycheck to a charity in her mother's name, cutting ties with the precision of a surgeon. There would be no goodbyes. She refused to give anyone the satisfaction of watching her break. At Maddox Innovations, the silence around her absence was louder than any gossip. The corridors where she once moved with invisible precision now buzzed with nervous energy. Some whispered that she had betrayed the company, others whispered that Grant himself had sacrificed her for the sake of the deal. But Grant Maddox said nothing. He sat in his office behind glass walls, staring at the empty desk where she once sat. Her chair still turned slightly, as if she might return at any moment. His board praised him for acting quickly. His legal team assured him the company would recover. But none of their words touched the hollow ache inside his chest. He had not lost an assistant. He had lost the only person who had dared to hold his gaze without fear. Days blurred into nights as Grant obsessed over the breach logs, poring over codes and timestamps until his vision blurred. At first it was pride that drove him, but then came doubt. And finally came the truth. Olivia's name had been used, yes, but the path of intrusion was too clean, too deliberate. He discovered an overlooked email sent by her a week before the breach warning of vulnerabilities his own team had ignored. She had done her job perfectly. The bet, Rail, was not hers. It was his. He had chosen silence when she needed him most, and in that silence she had walked away. By then she was already gone. A one-way ticket to Savannah in her hand, a city that moved slower than Manhattan but breathed more freely. She arrived with nothing but her suitcase, her resume, and a fire no one could extinguish. The moss-draped trees and cobblestone streets welcomed her with a softness she had forgotten existed. Here people looked one another in the eye. Here she was not an assistant or a liability. She was a woman starting over. Within weeks she began consulting for a small bakery chain struggling to survive. Her mind for systems and her quiet discipline transformed their operations. Profits doubled within 3 months. Word spread. A local theater collective sought her advice. She secured funding that turned their abandoned building into a thriving cultural hub. One by one, Savannah learned her name, not in whispers, but in respect. She became known as the woman who saw what others missed, the strategist who walked softly but left echoes wherever she went. Meanwhile, in New York, Dylan Hayes raised a glass to his success. The breach had accomplished more than a ruined merger. It had torn Grant Maddox open, exposed him to the one weakness no one believed he had: heart. Dylan was not finished. He intended to turn Olivia's exile into a weapon and Grant's guilt into a leash. And while Savannah gave Olivia the peace of a new beginning, shadows still stretched from Manhattan, ready to pull her back into a war she did not yet know she was part of. But Olivia Hart was no longer the silent assistant who moved like a ghost behind glass towers. She was rebuilding into something stronger. And when the storm from her past finally reached her new city, she would not hide. She would be ready. Savannah breathed differently from Manhattan. The air was slower, the streets softer, the mornings touched with sunlight that lingered instead of cutting sharp like glass. Olivia Hart walked beneath moss-draped oaks, carrying a leather folder under one arm, her cream blouse fluttering lightly in the breeze. She had left behind the shadows of Maddox Innovations, but she had not left behind her determination. In New York, she had been invisible. In Savannah, she was becoming inevitable. Local business owners sought her out quietly at first, then insistently. She streamlined logistics for a farmer's market, turned a failing bookstore into a profitable hub with a digital arm, and taught a team of young entrepreneurs how to pitch their dreams without apology. Each victory strengthened her reputation. People spoke her name with respect. She was no longer the assistant behind someone else's empire, she was building her own. But storms travel far, and New York was not finished with her. Dylan Hayes had made sure of that. From his sleek office, he tracked her progress with a predator's patience. To him, Olivia was not just a woman who had escaped, she was leverage. He had planted her downfall once, and he intended to do it again, this time using her rising success as a weapon against Grant Maddox. If Maddox still carried guilt, Dylan would twist it until it shattered him completely. What Dylan underestimated was that Olivia no longer stood in anyone's shadow. Across the city, Grant was unraveling in silence. Weeks had turned into months, yet her absence haunted him more fiercely than any rival or lost deal. He replayed the night of the breach over and over until the truth became unbearable. She had warned them, she had protected him, and he had failed her. The empire he built felt hollow without the woman who had kept its heart beating. His board could not understand why he appeared restless, why his sharp focus wavered, but Grant knew the answer. He had built his fortune on control and yet lost the one person he could not replace because fear had made him weak. So he left Manhattan without announcement, no entourage, no headlines. He arrived in Savannah with a single duffel bag and a silence that felt heavier than the skyscrapers he left behind. For the first time in his life, no one cared who he was. No cameras followed him, no assistants ran at his command. He walked cobblestone streets, anonymously watching mothers push strollers and shopkeepers sweep doorsteps. And in that anonymity, he felt the sharp sting of humility. He saw Olivia before she ever saw him. She was leaving a restored theater, her laughter warm as she spoke with two clients, her hair loose around her shoulders, catching the afternoon sun. Grant stopped across the street, his chest tightening. She looked radiant, not because of a dress or a spotlight, but because she belonged here in a way she never had in Manhattan. He did not approach. He simply watched and for the first time understood what it meant to admire without possession. But admiration alone would not be enough. He knew Dylan still circled like a vulture waiting to strike again. He knew Olivia deserved more than apologies whispered in the shadows. If he wanted even the chance to stand beside her, he would need to prove himself through action, not power. And so quietly he began. Anonymous donations funneled to the youth programs she supported, investments into small businesses she consulted for, hours spent volunteering at a community mentorship program where no one recognized his name. He told no one, not even her. Redemption was not to be spoken. It was to be lived, yet Dylan had already set his pieces on the board. His men whispered rumors of Olivia's past back into Savannah's polite circles, questioning her ties to Maddox, questioning whether her rise was built on scandal. It was only a matter of time before his schemes reached her doorstep, and when they did, the battle would no longer be about a company or a merger. It would be about loyalty, truth, and whether Grant Maddox had finally become a man who could stand in the storm instead of hiding behind glass walls. Olivia had rebuilt her life on clarity and choice. Grant had come to her city with regret heavy on his shoulders. Dylan carried malice like a weapon sharpened to a deadly edge. Their paths were colliding, and Savannah was about to learn that even in its quiet streets, war can arrive dressed in silk and shadows. The night of the Savannah Gala shimmered under strings of warm light draped across the restored Civic Hall. Round tables glowed with candles, laughter carried through the courtyard, and the hum of jazz curled beneath it all. This was Olivia Hart's night, though she had not asked for it. Her consulting firm had transformed the city in quiet, deliberate ways, and the community had chosen to honor her. She wore an emerald gown, simple yet radiant, and her presence commanded the room with the ease of someone who no longer questioned her worth. She was not the assistant in the background of someone else's empire anymore. She was the woman people gathered to see. But in the crowd, shadows moved. Dylan Hayes had arrived uninvited, his charm wrapped around him like a snake. He had already poisoned investors with whispers planting doubts about Olivia's sudden rise, suggesting that her success was built on stolen resources from Maddox Innovations. His voice dripped with certainty, his grin sharp as he spread the story. By the time the speeches began, Olivia could feel the weight of it, eyes glancing her way, not with admiration, but with suspicion. Grant Maddox stood near the back, his sleeves rolled, his posture tense as he listened. He had come to Savannah stripped of his armor, not as a billionaire, but as a man who had failed the one person he valued most. Tonight, he could not stay silent. When Dylan stepped onto the stage uninvited, his glass raised and his words cutting, Grant moved forward, his voice thunderous enough to silence the courtyard. Enough. The crowd turned. Dylan smirked. The great Grant Maddox come to defend his reputation or his former assistant. Grant's eyes locked on Olivia first, then on Dylan. I am here to defend the truth. He pulled a folder from under his arm. Crisp papers lined with data server logs, security timestamps, everything he had spent months piecing together in silence. This is the breach that destroyed the Kronos deal. It was never Olivia Hart. She warned us a week before the attack. These are her emails, these are her reports. And here he held up another document. These are the access logs traced back to your servers. Dylan? The courtyard gasped. Dylan's smile faltered. Lies, he snapped, but his voice lacked conviction. Grant stepped closer, his voice steady. You wanted to destroy me and you used her as your weapon because you thought she was defenseless. But you underestimated her. She was the reason my empire stood as long as it did. Without her, I was blind. With her, I finally see. All eyes turned to Olivia. She stood calm, though her heart thundered. This was the moment she had been denied in New York, the moment someone with power chose to speak when it counted. The host took the microphone, her voice trembling. Olivia, do you wish to respond? Olivia stepped forward, her gaze sweeping the room. I don't need to defend myself, the evidence speaks. What matters is not that I was accused, but that I walked away and built something stronger. This city believed in me, and I believed in myself. That is why we are standing here tonight, not because of power, not because of scandal, but because of truth. Applause rose first in cautious waves, then thunderous, until the courtyard vibrated with it. Dylan tried to slip away, but the officials waiting near the doors intercepted him, documents already in their hands. Grant had done his work well. When the noise faded, Olivia turned to Grant, her eyes unreadable. You proved the truth, she said softly, but that does not erase the silence that came before. He nodded, his voice quiet. I know. I failed you when it mattered, and I cannot undo that. All I can do is stand beside you now, not ahead, not behind, beside. If you tell me to leave, I will. If you give me a chance, I will spend the rest of my life earning it. The crowd had moved back into conversation, the jazz swelling again, but in that corner of the courtyard it felt like the world held still. Olivia studied him, the man who had once commanded every room, now stripped of ego, standing raw before her. For a long moment she said nothing. Then at last she whispered, This is your only chance. No excuses, no more shadows. If you disappear again, you don't get to come back. Grant's answer was simple. I won't. She held his gaze, searching for the truth in it. Then slowly she extended her hand, not for a dance, not for possession, but for presence. He took it, and for the first time their silence was not a barrier, but a bond. Around them, Savannah's night glowed with lantern light and the faint scent of magnolia. Olivia Hart had been invisible once, but no longer. She had faced betrayal, rebuilt her world, and chosen her own story. And Grant Maddox, the man who once thought control was everything, finally understood that real power was not in empires, but in presence. They stood together, not because fate demanded it, but because choice allowed it. And in that moment, beneath the lanterns and the music, the storm between them quieted, leaving only truth, respect, and the beginning of something that might one day be called love.